What's the most suspicious act you've witnessed from a stranger? It was the kind of afternoon made for escaping the world. I'd tuck myself into the far corner of a little cafe just off 9th Street, one of those places with chipped mugs and mismatched chairs that always smelled faintly of cinnamon and espresso grounds. I wasn't trying to meet anyone. In fact, I was actively avoiding people that day, letting the soft clinking of dishes and occasional hiss from the espresso machine blur into the background as I disappeared into a dog-eared paperback. And then he arrived. Or rather, drifted in, like he wasn't quite sure he belonged anywhere. Tallish, slightly disheveled, with an old green parka that seemed too heavy for the weather. He walked slowly past the tables, glanced around like he was looking for someone, then picked the seat just beside mine. Odd because the place was mostly empty. I noticed him, of course, but only because he was so conspicuously nonchalant. 10 minutes later, I looked up to grab my mug, and there it was, a worn, brown leather wallet resting right next to my book. My heart gave a small lurch. Not because of the wallet itself, but because I hadn't seen or heard him leave. I didn't see when he got up, didn't even notice the scrape of the chair. At first, I assumed it was a mistake. Maybe he just got a call and left in a hurry, forgot it somehow. But something was off. It wasn't dropped, it was placed, directly facing me, like a gift or bait. I hesitated, touched the edge of it with 2 fingers. Should I open it? Leave it? Hand it to the barista? I decided on the last, better to let someone else handle it. I was halfway to the counter when the door swung open again. "There it is," he said, smiling wide, his voice a little too loud for the cozy space. He crossed the floor in a few quick steps and reached for the wallet in my hand. "Sorry. I must have left it when I went to the bathroom. Thanks for keeping it safe." I opened my mouth to say no problem, but he kept talking. "Can I at least buy you a coffee? I mean, it's the least I can do. My name's Ely, by the way." I shook my head politely. "That's okay. Really? No, seriously. Let me. What are you having? That's a good book. By the way, I love that author." It was one of those moments where everything in me whispered to say no. To walk away, to go home, to leave the story as nothing more than an odd afternoon blip. But against my better judgment, I smiled and said, "Sure, I'll take a refill." He grinned again, not menacing, but almost too eager. As he turned to the counter, I caught myself frowning. How had he known which book I was reading? I hadn't turned the cover up once. I pushed the thought aside. It wasn't impossible. Maybe he glanced earlier, maybe he really liked this author. I took the mug, accepted the coffee, and we talked small things at first. Books, local places, how long I'd lived in the city. It felt harmless enough for now, but something about the way he watched me, like he already knew me, set something deep in my chest rattling. I left not long after, claiming an appointment. He asked if I came here often. I lied and said no. Outside, I walked faster than usual, my mind replaying the whole interaction. A coincidence, I told myself. A strange but harmless encounter. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I hadn't just met someone by chance. I'd been targeted. 2 days later, I received a message request on Instagram from a name I didn't recognize at first, Ely Marston. No mutuals, no bio, just a simple, "Hey, hope I didn't weird you out the other day." I realized later I might have come off intense. It caught me off guard. I hadn't given him my name or socials, not even a last initial. I stared at the message for a full minute before responding. "How did you find me?" He replied almost instantly. "Your book." I remembered the name on the library sticker. I took a guess. "Sorry if that's creepy. Just wanted to say thanks again for being kind." I reread the message several times. My library card had my last name and the library's branch name on it, printed in fading black ink across the barcode. It wasn't hard to guess what he did. He probably remembered my face and started combing social media. Maybe it wasn't that strange in this digital age. Still, something about his tone didn't sit right. "Apology accepted." I typed, "Take care." He liked the message but didn't reply. I thought that would be the end of it, a blip, again. Just one of those weird things that happen in cities where paths cross and people overstep. But the following weekend, I ran into him again, this time at the flower stand near my building. I just finished picking out a bunch of eucalyptus and marigolds when I saw him from the corner of my eye. "Hey again," he said with that same disarming grin. "You live around here?" I nodded slowly. "Yeah. A few blocks down, small world," he said. "I come here for their tulips." It felt too convenient. I'd never seen him here before. Still, I smiled politely, trying to keep it brief. But he didn't let up. "You were on my mind," he said almost sheepish. "After the cafe." Not many people are that nice. Most would have handed the wallet over and walked away. I didn't know how to respond, so I just said, "Glad it made your day." Then came the invitation. "There's this place down the block," he said. "They do amazing ramen. Want to join me for lunch?" I hesitated. Again, I could have lied, I should have. But his eyes, there was something heavy behind them, like he hadn't had someone say yes In a long time. Against reason, I nodded. It turned into a long lunch. He told me he was a freelance illustrator, mostly working on album covers and the occasional graphic novel. He talked about growing up in a small town, about moving here alone, about long walks through the city when he couldn't sleep. He had a voice that softened when he spoke about loneliness. It made it hard to think of him as threatening. And that's what made it worse. I started to feel like maybe I'd been too harsh in my suspicions. Sometimes I just talk too much, he said midway through his miso broth. It's hard not to cling to small moments, you know? I nodded, unsure what he meant. He glanced up. You ever meet someone and feel like you were supposed to? That's when the weight settled in my stomach again. A reflex I couldn't name. My fingers tightened around the chopsticks. I smiled. Carefully, maybe, but I think most connections are just coincidences. He didn't reply right away, then, softer than before, yeah, maybe. After we left, he offered to walk me back. I declined, saying I had an errand. He nodded, understanding. As I turned, I heard him call out, "Thanks again. For not treating me like I'm weird." That line echoed longer than it should have. By the time I reached home, a strange unease had crept under my skin. I went online and checked his Instagram again. No posts, no tags, just a blank canvas. And when I reverse searched his profile picture, it didn't come up anywhere else. Later that night, a note slid under my door. It was typed. "You looked happy today. I hope I didn't mess that up." I stared at it until my hands started shaking. How had he known where I lived? After the note, I didn't sleep much. Every creak of the building's old bones made me jolt awake, sheets tangled around my legs like vines. I triple-locked my door, turned off location services on every app, and set my phone to silent. But silence wasn't safety. It only made the smallest sounds feel enormous. The next morning, I told myself it had to be a mistake. Maybe someone slipped the note under the wrong door. Maybe it wasn't from Eli at all. That illusion lasted exactly 3 days. On Tuesday, I walked to my usual grocery store, the one a few blocks away where the fruit always looked too perfect and the cashiers never made eye contact. I kept my head down, basket half full of comfort food. Crackers, tea, granola bars. I wasn't even halfway through the snack aisle when I saw him. Eli, not browsing, not shopping, just standing, hands in his coat pockets, watching me. When I noticed him, he smiled, soft, as if we'd met by accident and he wasn't entirely sure if it was okay to say hi. I froze. "Hey," he said, as if the moment hadn't dropped like a stone into the center of my chest. "Didn't expect to see you here." I forced a smile. "Yeah, me neither." He glanced into my basket, then back at me. "Stocking up? Just grabbing a few things?" He nodded. "I live nearby. This place is kinda my go-to." The same vague excuse I'd given him at the flower stand. I left quickly after that, paid for half my groceries and practically jogged back home. Every reflection in a window felt like a shadow following me. The next coincidence was Thursday. It was early morning, just past sunrise. I was trying to switch up my routine, taking a different jogging route through the park. The air was crisp, leaves sticking to the damp pavement. My feet were pounding in rhythm with the music in my ears when I saw him, leaning against the railing by the small lake, not dressed for running, not even pretending, just there, watching ducks. Watching it and stop. I ran harder, faster. My lungs burned. That night, I deleted Instagram. I set my profiles, removed every old post with a geotag. Still, I kept asking myself the same question: was I being followed? Or was I seeing patterns where there weren't any? But the answer made itself obvious. The third time was the worst. It was a Sunday afternoon. Cold, raining, miserable, the kind of day where no one wanted to be outside. I had my hoodie up, earbuds in, umbrella turned against the wind, barely noticing the puddles I splashed through. I stopped at the corner store to grab a bottle of soda and some batteries. The fluorescent lights buzzed, the old man behind the counter nodded without looking up. And then a familiar voice behind me. "Twice in 1 week, we must have the same taste in snacks." I turned. He was standing by the door, no umbrella, no jacket, soaked, smiling. Every part of me wanted to scream. Instead, I managed to breathe. "Are you following me?" His face changed, not to shock, not to guilt, just a quiet hurt. "No," he said, slowly. "Why would you say that?" "Because you keep showing up," I said, voice trembling. "Grocery store. Park now here." "I live nearby," he said again. "You said it yourself." "This neighborhood's small." I shook my head. "No, this isn't a coincidence." He looked at me then, really looked. And in that moment, he didn't look dangerous, he looked tired. "I'm not trying to scare you," he said, voice low. I don't know how to be normal about this." I didn't answer. I just turned and walked out into the rain. When I got home, I closed every curtain, locked every window, sat on the couch and stared at my phone. There were no new messages, but I had the feeling, stronger than before, that he was watching. That maybe he always had been. I hadn't heard from Eli in nearly a week, and for a moment, I let myself believe it was over. Maybe he got the message. Maybe my silence, my avoidance, my fear-laced glances were enough to push him away. But the universe has a way of dragging you back in just when you think you've escaped. It was a Friday night when my phone buzzed again. A number not saved in my contacts but unmistakably his. Last time, I promise. One dinner, closure, if nothing else. I stared at the message for a long time, my thumb hovering over the screen. My mind spun with warnings, all the things I should do, block, ignore, report. But curiosity, that dangerous thread, had woven its way too tightly into the fabric of my fear. I replied with one word: public. He sent an address, a modest Italian restaurant nestled between two boutiques I used to browse when I could still enjoy walking alone. I arrived early, sat near the door, my back to the wall, my bag clutched tight to my side. I almost left 3 times before he walked in, damp from the drizzle outside, hair messy but with an air of calm I hadn't seen before. He looked at me, not like someone eager, but someone resolved. "Thanks for coming," he said as he sat down. I nodded. "You said you wanted closure." He sighed, hands folded on the table. "I owe you an explanation." The waiter arrived and we both ordered something small, neither of us hungry, just pretending at normalcy. As soon as the man walked away, Eli leaned forward. "I saw you 2 months before we met." I blinked. "What? In the park?" He said. "You were reading on a bench near the fountain. I was having a bad day, really bad. I noticed how calm you looked, like the whole world could disappear and you wouldn't flinch." My stomach tightened. "I started going back," he said, "to the park. Hoping to see you again." I don't know what I thought I'd say. I don't know. You felt like something good, something quiet. I hadn't had that in a long time. "So you staged the wallet?" I said quietly. He nodded. "I didn't know how else to talk to you. It was stupid. I know it was wrong. I wanted to be furious. I wanted to throw my water in his face and storm out. But his voice wasn't smug, not defensive. He sounded like someone dragging behind him like a broken limb. "And the notes? The photos? Showing up everywhere?" "That wasn't part of the plan," he said. "After you agreed to coffee, I thought maybe this could be real. But I kept messing up." I panicked. "I wanted to keep being around you, so I convinced myself it was harmless." "Wasn't harmless," I snapped. My voice cracked. "You terrified me." He looked down at his hands, jaw clenched. "I know. I hate myself for that." We sat in silence for a long moment. Our food arrived untouched. "Why didn't you just talk to someone?" I asked. "A therapist. A friend." "I didn't have anyone," he said. "Not for years. My mom died when I was 20. My dad left. I've moved so many times I forget what state I'm in. I'm not trying to make you feel sorry for me. I'm just telling you why I was so broken." I stared at him. For a flicker of a moment, I saw not a stalker, but a man who'd fallen into obsession out of desperation. Still, empathy didn't erase what he'd done. "You need help," I said, "and I need you to leave me alone." He nodded, slowly. "I will. After tonight." We left separately. I walked with my phone clutched in my hand, ready to call someone, anyone, if I sensed him behind me. But he didn't follow. That night, I got one last text. "I'm sorry for the pain I caused. I just wanted to be seen." I didn't reply. But I didn't sleep either. For the next 2 weeks, the world seemed to reset itself. My days returned to a predictable rhythm. Work, errands, dinner alone in my apartment with a podcast playing softly in the background. I even returned to the cafe where we first met, sitting in my old spot, cautiously scanning the door out of habit. But the silence was short-lived. I hadn't blocked his number. A mistake I now regret. And one evening a new message came through. "I know I said that was it. I just needed to see if you were okay." I didn't respond, but I didn't delete it either. Curiosity, that slow, burning poison, made me scroll through our old texts. And that's when I noticed something strange. In one message from earlier, Eli had claimed he moved to the city 4 years ago. But in the restaurant, he said it had been only 2. When we first met, he said he was working on a graphic novel, but later referred to finishing an album cover for a band. One I Googled and found out hadn't released anything in over 5 years. Little inconsistencies, each one small enough to overlook, but together forming a web of doubt. I started looking deeper. I went back to his social media, or what little remained of it. His Instagram, once blank, had been updated with 3 moody black and white photos, a sketchbook, a rain-soaked street, and a cup of coffee. No captions, no comments. I searched for Lee Marston in freelance artist directories. Nothing. I even tried LinkedIn. No results matched his face or claimed profession. Then I tried something riskier. I reverse searched his photo again, this time using a paid tool. That's when I found it. The face was real, but the name wasn't. The man in the photo had a different identity entirely. He was an artist, yes, but based in another state. Married, children, private accounts. My chest tightened. The man I knew as Eli had stolen someone else's image, someone else's identity, just to create his version of a life that would appeal to me. I sat frozen, rereading our conversations with new eyes. Every compliment, every story, every expression of interest now felt like a script, a play he'd crafted for my benefit. I was never speaking to Ely, not really. I was talking to a ghost cloaked in someone else's reality. I began writing down every detail I could remember, dates, times, places, specific words he'd used. I created a folder on my desktop titled E and filled it with screenshots, saved pages, notes. But nothing prepared me for the moment I checked my voicemail later that night. It was a message left 3 hours earlier. His voice was calm, too calm. Hey, I thought you should know I've been honest about the important things. Even if I used a fake name. You have no idea what it's like to live in pieces. To be someone different in every place because you're afraid you'll disappear otherwise. I never wanted to hurt you. That was it. No goodbye, no apology, just that unsettling mix of guilt and justification. I replayed it 4 times, listening for tremors, for the breaks in his voice that might hint at sincerity. But it was measured, performed. Still, part of me wavered. Was it possible he believed his own lies? The next morning, I went to the local precinct. I brought the screenshots, the voicemail, the timeline I had so carefully built. I sat with an officer who listened with sympathy but spoke with limitation. He hasn't threatened you directly, she said. You've got a pattern, but it's thin. Technically, none of this is illegal unless we can prove harassment. I left feeling both exposed and invisible. The man I feared had rewritten his story so thoroughly that even the law couldn't find him in it. That night, another message arrived. You think I'm lying, but I meant it all? After the police visit, I became obsessed with searching my apartment. The officer's words had left a mark. He hadn't threatened me directly, but every corner of my home now felt infiltrated. What if I'd missed something? What if LA had left something behind during the times he visited? Back when I still thought we were just strangers growing into something uncertain. I began with the obvious drawers, closets, under the bed. I opened every cupboard, even the ones I rarely touched. I peeled back clothes from hangers, shuffled through my kitchen cabinets, dumped the contents of my junk drawer onto the floor and sifted through each stray paperclip and expired coupon. Nothing. But the fear wouldn't subside. It clung to my thoughts, tight and hot like static in the brain. So I turned to the bookshelves. Not just looking but feeling, testing for weight changes, loose bindings, hollow spaces. That's when I found it, tucked between 2 hardcover books, one about urban architecture, the other a forgotten mystery novel, was a sleek black pen that I didn't recognize. It looked new, smooth finish, no branding, but heavier than any pen should have been. I pulled it out and turned it slowly in my hand. One end had a faint circle of glass, no wider than a bead. My stomach dropped. A camera. I didn't scream. I didn't throw it across the room. I simply sat on the floor, back against the wall, holding it in my lap like something toxic. I turned it over and over, trying to understand how long it had been there. Had it recorded me? Uploaded to something remote? Or had it just been sitting, waiting, watching? The books around it were dusty. I hadn't touched them in months. That meant it could have been placed there during one of his early visits. Back when he brought over wine and stories about his art. Back when I still smiled at his texts. That night unraveled everything. I didn't sleep. I placed the pen in a sealed bag, then searched the rest of the apartment like a madwoman. Lamps, air vents, picture frames. I unscrewed the smoke detector. I pried off the back of my television. I opened the battery compartment on my clock. I checked the seams of my couch. Every noise outside made me freeze. By dawn, I'd gone over the place 3 times. I found nothing else. But the damage was already done. My home, my sanctuary, no longer belonged to me. I didn't go to work. I didn't call friends. I just sat at my dining table, staring at the pen in the bag, replaying every conversation we'd had, every moment when he looked around my apartment too carefully. Every time he asked about my routine, what days I worked late, which nights I ordered in, he was gathering information. I took the device to the police again. This time, they took it seriously. An officer, younger, sharper, nodded slowly as he examined it. Definitely a hidden camera. We'll check for recordings, serial numbers, anything we can use. Is this enough? I asked. My voice barely held. Maybe, he said, if we can trace it to him. But you don't even know who he is. I said bitterly. He met my eyes. We'll try. You should think about staying somewhere else for a few nights, just until we know more. So I packed a small bag and went to stay with my cousin on the other side of the city. She didn't ask many questions, just cleared out the guest room and handed me a spare key. For the first time in weeks, I slept with both eyes closed. But even there, even among family, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was still being watched. That somewhere, somehow, Ali was still inside the life I thought was mine alone. The police called 2 days later. They'd found recordings, footage of me alone in my apartment, reading, eating, sleeping. Nothing graphic, nothing criminal, but enough to make the officer's voice go quiet. He was watching you, he said. No doubt. But unless we find fingerprints, purchases linked to him, Or actual threats, it's still gray area. I hung up the phone and stared at the guest room ceiling. Somewhere in the shadows between law and reality, a man had made me a character in his obsession, and I didn't know how to make him stop. A week passed with no messages, no sightings, no updates from the police. But the silence didn't feel like safety. It felt like a pause before something worse. I tried to live like it was over, to tell myself that maybe the camera had spooked him, that maybe he'd finally realized the weight of what he'd done. But I didn't believe that. Not really. Then, one night, I saw him. I had returned to my apartment in a calculated, quiet visit. I'd coordinated with my cousin, let 2 neighbors know in advance, and planned to grab some personal items I hadn't packed. Journals, art supplies, a few sentimental pieces. I arrived just after sunset. The building was calm, eerily still. When I entered, I kept all the lights off. I moved quietly, deliberately. I was halfway through the bedroom when I noticed it. A faint creak in the hallway, like someone had leaned too heavily on the floorboards outside my door. I froze, heart pounding so violently I thought it might give me away. Then a knock, soft, 3 slow taps. I didn't move, I didn't breathe, and then, "I know you're in there." His voice. I crept to the door, peered through the peephole. Eli, same coat, dark eyes, hair damp from the drizzle outside. He wasn't yelling, he wasn't aggressive. He looked empty. He said, "I swear, I'll leave after." I debated calling the police, but some stubborn part of me, the part that still needed answers, reached for the chain lock instead. I opened the door just wide enough for my voice to slip through. "Why are you here?" He looked up and something in his expression twisted, not anger, not smugness, just a tired ache. "I can't sleep," he said. "I keep thinking about how it ended, how I messed it up." I didn't reply. "I wanted to stop," he continued. "I told myself I would, but it felt like cutting off air. I wasn't following you to hurt you. I was just trying to stay close to something that felt right." "You planted a camera in my house?" I said, cold now. "You lied about who you are. That's not love, Eli. That's control." He flinched, just barely. I didn't know what else to do. I've never had someone, that I didn't want to ruin. "You already did ruin it." He was quiet for a long moment. Then he pulled something from his coat pocket. A folded piece of paper. "I wrote this. I was going to mail it. But it felt wrong not to say it in person. I didn't take it." "I don't want any more pieces of you," I said. "I want you out of my life." "I will," he whispered. "I promise. I didn't know how else to end it." I closed the door, locked it, double-checked everything. Then I slid down to the floor, holding myself tight, shaking harder than I had since it all began. From the hallway, I heard one last sound, his footsteps, fading. When I finally opened the door again, hours later, the note was still there. I opened it with trembling hands. "You were never mine. But I wanted to believe that if I was good enough at pretending, maybe you would be. I'm sorry I took something peaceful and made it a prison. I don't know who I am without people like you. And I'm scared to find out." It was the closest thing to truth he'd ever given me. I handed it to the police the next morning. They used it to file a formal report. Still, there were no charges, no arrests, only warnings, only more waiting. I moved again, a different part of the city this time, farther out, more suburban, less foot traffic. I didn't leave a forwarding address. I didn't update my location on any apps. I changed my phone number. I deleted every trace of my old social media accounts and created new ones under a variation of my middle name. I left donated furniture, donated clothes, and let go of items that felt too tied to the person I used to be. I was starting over. The new apartment was smaller but clean, sparse but mine. For a few weeks, the silence of it felt like progress. I walked to nearby parks without glancing over my shoulder. I explored small bookstores where no one knew my face. My heart rate began to normalize, my nights less fractured by adrenaline and noise. But trauma is not linear, and neither, it seemed, was he. The first time I noticed a message again, it was through a comment on a public community board. Someone had created an account under a familiar username, not his, not directly, but one he'd used in a gaming chat he once told me about, a reference to an obscure comic series followed by a string of numbers. The message said, "You still look beautiful in green." It was posted beneath an unrelated thread, something about plant care. My stomach dropped. I hadn't posted a photo of myself in months, and certainly not one in that color. The next day a letter arrived, no return address, inside, a postcard. The kind sold in tourist shops with vintage images of city landmarks. The back was blank except for a single sentence. "Hope your neighbors are kinder this time." I hadn't spoken to anyone in my new building. I hadn't shared my address. My first instinct was panic, but I didn't let it drown me. I filed another report. I printed the message, the postcard, the screenshots. The officer, a new one, was sympathetic but still limited. Unless he physically appeared, unless he crossed a line, there was little they could do. I upgraded the locks again, installed security cameras. notified the building manager, who agreed to let me know if anyone unusual was spotted near my door. Still, it kept happening. Every couple of weeks, a message would surface in some obscure way, a song emailed to an old account I'd forgotten to close, a playlist titled, For Her, made public under a random Spotify alias. One day, a gift card to my favorite cafe arrived via email with no sender listed, all anonymous, all unmistakably him. I began to fear the quiet moments the most. The gaps between the incidents. They stretched like tension wires, each one vibrating with the potential for the next violation. I tried therapy. I needed someone to help me process what felt like a constant, low-level war. My therapist called it hyper-vigilance trauma. She explained how the brain rewires itself to anticipate danger when it's been fed fear too often. She said it wasn't my fault. Still, I blamed myself for replying to that first message, for agreeing to that lunch, for not listening to my instincts earlier. One day, in session, I said, I feel like I let him inside something I can't get back. She nodded. That's what obsession does. It makes you feel like you've lost ownership over your own narrative. The truth of that hurt more than I expected. Because she was right, I hadn't just been a victim of his attention, I had been rewritten by it. Even in his absence, I carried the shadow of his presence. Still, I tried. I went outside more. I took up swimming, something repetitive and calming that let me feel weightless for an hour at a time. I stopped checking certain websites. I stopped letting his imagined gaze follow me through the apartment, but I never fully relaxed. He had stolen something intangible, the ability to feel invisible, to live without surveillance. And the worst part, he hadn't broken any laws that would stick. I discovered it by accident. I was helping a friend troubleshoot her privacy settings on social media when I decided to try a vanity search. Just my name in quotes, followed by the city. Something I hadn't done in a long time. Something I used to do occasionally back in college just to see what came up. This time, I wasn't prepared. There were profiles, 3 of them under variations of my full name. Not exact but close enough to be convincing. One added a middle initial, one used my surname slightly misspelled, the third included the neighborhood I used to live in. Each profile had photos of me, some selfies I had taken years ago. One was a picture from that cafe, the first time I met him, a candid shot I didn't even remember anyone taking. Another was a still from a video I'd once posted on my old account, long deleted. I clicked through the pages, they were curated like scrapbooks. Each had bio lines that mimicked my tone. Posts that sounded like things I might say. Benign, almost poetic quotes about loneliness, self-worth, nostalgia. One page had status updates written in a voice that mirrored mine so precisely I felt nauseated reading them. But the worst part wasn't just seeing my image stolen, it was the comments, dozens of them, from strangers, from fake profiles, all replying to posts as though I'd written them. Compliments, private messages, and occasionally flirtatious threads. People thought they were talking to me, then I saw his name, not Illy, but a new alias, M. His comments were constant. Loving. Familiar. She has the kindest heart. I miss her every day. You still dream about that lake house, right? Funny how you're always drawn to quiet bookstores. Details no one else would know. My private thoughts turned into someone else's performance. He was pretending we were in a relationship. Publicly. He was speaking to me through the version of me he'd constructed, and the world was watching without knowing the difference. I reported everything, every profile, every photo, every message. But the platforms responded with the same mechanical replies. This account does not violate our terms of service. Insufficient evidence to confirm impersonation. No direct threat identified. I took screenshots, documented timestamps, sent copies to the police. Once again, they were limited. Unless he crossed into direct harassment or used my identity for financial gain, there was little they could prosecute. I wanted to scream. I emailed the companies again. I threatened legal action. One of them, reluctantly, removed a profile, but the others stayed up for weeks, drawing in likes and interactions from people who had no idea they were feeding a fantasy. Friends started to notice. A coworker texted me asking why I was posting such emotional stuff. Lately, a cousin sent me a screenshot of a message from one of the fake profiles saying, "Let's meet up again like old times." I wanted to disappear. He hadn't just invaded my home, my routine, or my peace. He had hijacked my identity, and worse, he was using that identity to communicate, not just with me, but with the world. Rewriting the narrative, making me the main character in a story I never consented to tell. I hired a privacy consultant. It cost more than I could afford, but the woman I worked with was sharp, relentless. She tracked digital fingerprints, IP proxies, VPN routes. She showed me how deep his web went. He had created dummy email addresses, generated profile photos for fake friends who commented on my fake posts. He had crafted an entire online social circle around this version of me. People who loved me, missed me, supported me, none of them real, except for me. The real me quietly unraveling. I deleted everything again, changed passwords, reset my devices, bought new ones. scrubbed myself from every searchable index I could find. Still, I knew it wouldn't be enough. Because he didn't need my cooperation anymore. He had built an entire digital shrine, and I was its unwilling deity. By now, my life felt like a tightrope walk across an invisible wire, everything balanced on fear and repetition. With each new violation, I collected evidence, filled out forms, updated the growing folder labeled E on my desktop. I built a case like people build bunkers, piece by desperate piece. This time the evidence was clearer, screenshots of impersonation, messages to others that blurred the line between delusion and fraud, captions under photos of me that described fabricated memories, times we were never together, places we'd never gone. I returned to the same precinct, this time with my privacy consultant's summary report in hand. She had included metadata, behavioral analysis, IP traces, a tidy presentation of just how deep his online identity theft had gone. The officer, a woman I hadn't met before, sat quietly as she flipped through it. "You've done more work on this than half the detectives I know," she muttered. I didn't smile. I just nodded. She typed quietly, then excused herself to speak to a superior. I waited in the too cold fluorescent lit room, tapping my thumbnail against the folder. When she returned, she gave me a small, sympathetic smile. "We can open a file for digital impersonation," she said. "It's a civil matter unless he uses your identity for financial gain, or directly harasses or threatens someone using it." I blinked. That's it. "We'll also issue a formal no-contact order," she added. "It's not quite a restraining order, but it's a first step. If he violates it, then we have something actionable." I took a deep breath. What about the hidden camera? The messages? The stalking? Hull noted. "But since he hasn't made physical contact since the last report, our hands are still tied." Her voice wasn't unkind. But it was final. They couldn't stop him from pretending I was his. They couldn't stop him from watching, from whispering, from stepping just inside the lines of the law. But I could. I went further than before. I wiped my online presence again, but this time I filed a legal name change. I worked with a lawyer to create a cease and desist letter, which we sent via certified mail to the last known address we could tie to any of his digital footprints. It came back unopened. I got a new phone. I changed providers. I started using encrypted messaging apps and VPNs. My therapist and I worked through a safety plan, exit strategies, grounding techniques, panic response steps. But every morning, I woke up wondering what's next. One evening, I found something to the outside of my apartment building's front door. A flyer. It looked like a lost pet notice at first, until I got closer. It was a photo of me, a candid, distant shot. The same one from the fake profile, the cafe day. Underneath was a quote, "Have you seen her? Because I miss her every second." There was no name, no contact info, just that. I took it down. I showed it to the police. "This crosses a line," my lawyer said. "It's emotional coercion disguised as romantic expression. That can count as harassment." We filed another report. This time I asked directly, "Can you find him?" The answer may be. But he's good at staying just legal enough. He knows where the lines are. That was the worst part. Eli wasn't impulsive. He was careful, calculated. He moved like a chess player, always 3 steps ahead. He had learned how to craft attention without consequence. And while the police had finally labeled it harassment, even opened an investigation into online impersonation, their hands remained mostly tied. No arrest, no warrant, just more documentation, more evidence of how deeply he'd etched himself into my world. Without leaving fingerprints, I started dreaming of erasure, not his. Mine, to vanish completely, not as defeat, but as escape, not as surrender, but as survival. And still, even then, I wondered, would he find me again? Would he let me disappear? It happened without warning. A silence so sudden it felt staged. After months of psychological warfare, of cryptic messages and digital hauntings, everything stopped. No new comments, no anonymous accounts, no packages, no photos, not even the eerie sense that someone was watching. Just nothing. At first, I thought I'd missed something, that maybe he had escalated in ways I hadn't detected. I combed through my email spam folders, checked the alley-facing side of my building, reviewed security footage from the tiny camera mounted above my front door. No sign. I waited for the other shoe to drop. Days passed, then a week, then 2. Still nothing. The detective assigned to my case, an older man with tired eyes and a quiet way of speaking, called to tell me that Eli's digital presence had gone dark. Every alias, every platform he'd used had been deleted or abandoned within a 3-day span. "We've seen this before," he said. "Sometimes they burn it all down when they realize they're being watched too closely. It's a way of covering their tracks or moving on to someone else." The phrase made my blood run cold. I asked if there had been reports from other victims. He wouldn't say, couldn't say. I should have felt relief. That was what everyone told me. "He's gone. You're free." But relief didn't come. Instead, it was replaced by suspicion, doubt, that perhaps this was just another layer of his manipulation, disappearing to see what I'd do if I'd call out, If I'd mourned the absence he'd carved into my life like a ritual. The silence wasn't peace, it was uncertainty. It was looking over my shoulder at shadows and wondering which one would reach for me next. I changed locks again, stopped opening my mailbox, left packages to sit for days before touching them. I jumped at any message request, flinched at the sight of a parka, avoided every place that had once been part of our story. But still, no contact. Eventually, I started to breathe again. A little. I reconnected with friends I had pushed away. I told them parts of the story, carefully edited. Online harassment, I called it. Some guy who couldn't take a hint. It was easier than admitting how thoroughly I'd been broken down. How someone I barely knew had hollowed out my life and filled it with himself. 2 months passed, then 3. By the time winter thawed into spring, I had gone entire days without thinking of him. The therapist said that was progress. I called it a trick of the brain, like a scar fading just enough to make you think the wound was gone. But one evening, while cleaning out the storage closet in my new apartment, I found something that made my pulse stop cold, a book. Not one I remembered packing, it was a slim volume of poetry wrapped in aged paper. When I opened the front cover, I saw a note. Even silence has an echo. No return address, no message beyond that, just his initial, written in ink I didn't recognize, on paper that smelled faintly of tobacco and something floral, like the candles he once pretended to like because I'd said they made the room feel calm. I hadn't let anyone in. Not the movers, not the building staff, no one except the delivery man and only to the door. So how had it gotten here? I told myself it was a mistake, a trick of memory, a book I'd forgotten about, a note from someone else, some coincidence my brain was bending into a ghost story. But deep down I knew, it was him. One last whisper, one last reminder that even when he was gone, he wasn't. It came in the dead heat of July, the kind of day where the sun presses against the windows and even the floorboards feel too warm. I had almost convinced myself that the worst had passed. That he, whoever he really was, had retreated into the void from which he came. That maybe people really did burn themselves out eventually, like dying stars. Then I saw the package. No return address. Brown paper, string tied like something from another time. My name printed in delicate, deliberate handwriting, the kind you see on wedding invitations or engraved cards, not on anonymous parcels. I stood there in the hallway for a long time, staring at it on the welcome mat. I considered leaving it there, ignoring it, pretending it wasn't mine. But I couldn't. I brought it inside with latex gloves, opened it slowly, heart pounding as if expecting something to jump out, something toxic, something dangerous. But what I found was far worse. It was personal. Inside, layered carefully like the contents of a time capsule, were loose pages, notebook paper, unlined sheets, some torn from what looked like journals. They were written in longhand, dozens of them. The first few entries were ramblings, musings about our encounters, his feelings, his observations. But as I read on, it became clear these weren't journal entries. They were records. 6:47 p.m. She sat by the window again, wearing the navy sweater. Her hair. 8:03 p.m. She opened the door for a delivery. Chinese food, chicken lo mein, laughed on the phone afterward. 1:12 a.m. She cried. Couldn't see why. Maybe a movie, maybe me, page after page, moment after moment. Dates, times, notes about my movements, my clothes, my moods. He had been watching me, even in the silence, even in the supposed absence. He had still been watching. Some entries were poetic, metaphors and imagery that turned my ordinary life into something mythic in his eyes. She is a lighthouse that doesn't know it glows. Every time she leaves the house, the world shifts slightly. Others were darker. I wonder if she misses me. Even in her hate, she sleeps on her side, still facing away from door. She belongs to no one. But I was close. At the bottom of the stack was a photo, one I'd never seen before. I was asleep, mouth slightly open, hands curled near my face, blanket slipping off one shoulder. It wasn't from outside a window. It wasn't a digital screenshot. It was taken from inside my room. I dropped the entire bundle and staggered back, nausea rising in my throat like bile. My vision blurred. My skin felt too tight. The air in the apartment thickened, as if something invisible had stepped into the room with me. I called the police. This time, I didn't hesitate. I didn't try to explain it gently. I told them everything, again, and they sent someone over within the hour. The officer who arrived handled the package like evidence, because now it finally was. This is serious, he said, carefully sliding the photo into a separate envelope. We'll run prints. Track the origin. If it was mailed, there's a chance we can trace it. A chance. That was all they ever offered. They opened a new case file. The detective called the next day, asked if I had enemies, exes, unstable family. I gave them his name, or the one he gave me. The digital trail, the journal entries, all of it. Weeks passed, the case crawled forward. But Ellie, he stayed gone. No more notes, no more sightings, no more messages from the shadows. Just that package, That record of how deeply he had nested into my life without permission. I began to wonder if maybe that had been the goodbye. Not a gesture of remorse, but a trophy, proof of how well he had studied me, how close he had gotten without me ever knowing, and I still didn't understand why. What did he want? Love? Control? Worship? Or was it something simpler? The thrill of existing in someone else's world without their knowledge. I burned the photo. I couldn't bring myself to destroy the rest. Not yet. They stayed sealed in a box under my bed like bones buried deep enough to forget, but not deep enough to rot. Time moved forward, but I remained behind. My body woke each day. My legs carried me to the store, the bus stop, the therapy office. I laughed when I was supposed to, smiled when the barista remembered my name, replied to texts with emojis. But I was only ever partially present. The rest of me locked away in a quiet, anxious loop, forever checking over my shoulder. It's strange how trauma settles into your bones, not with screams or sudden terror, but in slow erosion, a reluctance to answer unknown numbers. A tension in your shoulders at the sound of a footstep behind you. The instinct to hide even in places where you should feel at home. Some people assumed I'd moved on. They didn't see the way I scanned every delivery box for marks, the way I hesitated before turning the key in my front door, the way I froze at the smell of certain colognes in crowded places. I stopped sharing my life online. My new social profiles were locked down to the strictest privacy. No more selfies, no more tagging locations, no more life updates. I started using cash more often, avoided subscriptions, unsubscribed from newsletters. Every digital footprint I erased felt like reclaiming an inch of ground. A year passed. Then another. Seasons blurred together. The second winter was easier than the first. By the third, I found I could stand in line at a crowded café without scanning faces obsessively. I could go an entire week without thinking of him. That was the greatest victory of all. I never heard from the police again. No arrests, no resolution, no closure. Just the slow, anticlimactic fade out of a case that had never fully been taken seriously in the first place. My therapist called it delayed healing. The kind where you don't notice the progress until you're already halfway across the bridge. One day, I opened the box under my bed, the journal pages, still sealed. I considered burning them, ripping them up, drowning them in the bathtub. But I did something else. I added one page of my own. You watch me. You built stories from my movements. But this is the one story you'll never get to write. Then I sealed the box and tucked it deep into a storage unit, far from my apartment, far from him. Like a grave marker for a ghost that refused to leave quietly. I don't know if he's still out there. Maybe he's watching someone else now. Maybe he's stopped. Maybe he never will. But I've stopped waiting for the next knock on the door. And that, finally, feels like peace. These stories show the consequences and limits of trusting strangers. I opened my door to a man who left a wallet on my table and found myself unraveling in a web of obsession, manipulation, and surveillance. His lies, hidden cameras, and digital mimicry took pieces of my life I didn't know were vulnerable. I learned that silence isn't always safety, and that sometimes the most dangerous people don't shout or strike. They whisper, they observe, they wait. If you've ever had a strange encounter with someone who felt a little too familiar, share your story in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe for more real, life experiences that remind us just how thin the line is between stranger and shadow.